Greetings everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening wherever you are. A couple of announcements, so I'll try to make this short and sweet. I will be commenting on the True 411 stories, and I will be commenting on this video as well. Afterwards, my surgery is Wednesday the 29th. So, please don't think that I am ignoring anyone. There will be radio silence for a few days until I recover enough where I am coherent enough off the pain medicine I must take so that I can get back to commenting and interacting with you, the listeners, which is my most favorite part aside from narrating. Thank you for understanding. I have noticed a lot of hateful comments. There are rules set in the comments section. For those of you that seemingly don't read those and still continue to leave your hateful comments, you will be deleted or blocked. This channel is a positive channel. We do not tolerate negativity or hate. Constructive criticism is fine, but pure hate, absolutely not tolerated. I also ask my loyal subscribers and listeners and supporters, please do not engage with these individuals as they are only seeking attention. I will handle those myself. Thank you so much. This video is a long-form story video. So, for those of you that fall asleep to my voice, your wish has been granted. For those of you that may not like this type of content, my vision for the channel is that whomever may join or come to listen, I want there to be something for everyone here. Whether that be true stories or simple long-form stories that simply aren't true, but for entertainment and for sleep purposes for those of you that fall asleep to my voice. If I happen to run into a long-form story that's a true story, I will announce it before I read it. There have also been some comments about the rain ambiance. Most listeners, subscribers, and loyal listeners love the rain ambiance. There's also crackling fire that I use rarely, so those background rain ambience and crackling fire sounds aren't going away, as they do help people fall asleep, and they also enjoy a little background ambience as they're listening to the story. It keeps it more engaging. Those won't be going anywhere, unfortunately. I do apologize. If you like what you are hearing, down below in the description box, you can buy me a coffee as it helps me and the channel. I appreciate your generosity. Now, it is time to go back to ashes. For when we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, stronger, better person. In the morning, sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and enjoy these long-form stories. Quick disclaimer for these long-form story videos. An ad will play after my intro. There'll be a 10 to 15 second rain ambient pause, another ad will play, and then there will be no more ads throughout the entire video, as to not disturb you during these long form stories. I found a letter from my stalker. I found this note nailed onto a tree on my front lawn. I really don't know how to describe it. I'll just let you read it yourself. I saw you today. It was your birthday. You didn't see me. You hardly ever do these days. Your skin looked so nice and healthy, and your eyes, they were the most beautiful I'd ever seen them. You've grown so much. I remember how different you used to look when you were younger. I remember the day I first met you. It was 4 years ago. I was sitting at my desk, head down, listening to the teacher rattling off names for attendance. The teacher called out a name I didn't recognize, and a stranger's voice answered behind me. Was there a new student? The teacher didn't pause for a second, just continued calling out name after name. I turned my head to where the voice had come from. I saw you, a pale thing, so thin, your eyes so red, at a seat that should have been empty. I saw the fireflies flying around you, flickering, dozens of them, never straying far from you. I saw them going through you and coming out through your skin, like you were a mist to them. Can you believe I thought you were a ghost? No one else seemed to acknowledge the new strangers sitting at the back of the class. Class after class, hour after hour, passed as I waited for something to happen. For someone to notice you, for you to leave, for you to let out a ghoulish scream and claw at me like in the horror story. I was certain I was in. But nothing happened. Teachers came and went. My classmates laughed and slept, and you just sat there. The bell rang for recess. The other kids ran to their mundanities for the day, leaving me and you together in the empty classroom. You stood up and pulled a chair from the desk next to you, making it face your desk. You turned your head to me and spoke. Well, you're slow today. Come on, ask me your questions. I don't know why I didn't run away screaming at that moment. Probably would have turned out better for me in the long run. And let's not speculate. I guess at that point in my life, I was pretty bloody lonely. I figured there was only a 50-50 chance you'd eat me, and the other 50 was that someone wanted to talk to me. Kid priorities don't make sense to me either these days. So, I went along with the flow. I walked over to your desk, sat down on the chair you pulled for me, and asked my question. What were you? You told me you didn't know. You said that once you were a child, just like me, with parents and friends. You used to go to the same schools as me. Then, one day, one ordinary day, when you were 10, you just woke up and you were like this, covered in fireflies, and no one could remember you the moment they concentrated on anything else. No one, not even your parents. You told me of how I'd notice you every day, how I'd think of you until recess every day, how I'd come to you every day, how we would talk every day, how we would meet for the first time every day for the last 3 years, about how I'd forget the instant I walked out of the room, how everyone would forget you, how the fireflies would make them, how for the last 3 years you'd been alone. Your story was very hard to believe, so I didn't. I asked what reality prank show I was on. You looked, well, unimpressed, and asked me to continue telling my story. I was caught off guard by the non sequitur. You said last time I was here, I was telling you a story, a horror story about a haunted house. As you detailed the story, goosebumps prickled my skin. It was a story I'd been making up in my head, a story I hadn't told anyone yet. At that moment, a million reactions were open to me, all simultaneously adequate and inadequate. But the only thing that seemed proper was to finish the story for you, so I did. Halfway through, you interrupted me to ask if my mother had recovered from her sickness yet. I had to shake my head, a bit ashamed at the fact that I shared this private matter to a stranger. The story ended a few minutes before recess. My next class was in another room. You told me to go. Your steadiness took me back. You seemed so accepting of your fate, like you'd already gotten used to the idea of being forgotten forever. I was a kid back then. I wasn't a particularly smart kid, and I was probably on the onset of a crush. So, you can excuse what I did next as an example of my childhood stupidity. I grabbed my scissors, pressed it against my arm's skin, and dug in. As it drew blood, I pushed it forwards till the cut formed the shape I wanted. Letter by letter, I carved your name into my arm. Just so you know, I don't regret that. Don't get me wrong. Kid power might have made me do it, but it sure as hell didn't make the pain go away. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life. But even then as a kid, I thought what was happening to you was unfair. I remember how your eyes looked when you saw that. The confusion. How strange it was for you that anyone would want to remember. I remember that look so clearly. When I woke up the next day and saw your name on my arm, I remembered you. I didn't forget. That day, for the first time, we had a conversation that wasn't so one-sided. You said no one had ever done anything like that before, and suggested I might have a mental illness. I won't deny it. That drew a little blood. As we talked, a creeping thought came into my head. Did you prefer it when I didn't remember? That night I was sitting up on my bed, staring at your name on my arm, wondering if I should cover it up so I couldn't see it and give you back your privacy, when I heard a crash. I looked up to see my bedroom window shattered and a dirty rock on my floor. I looked out of the cracked window to see a dark figure on my lawn. You were outside yelling about how we should hang out. It took me a while to get used to how bad you were at talking to people. Years without practice made you quite a bit rusty. That was all right. We had a lot of time. For the next 2 years, we spent most of our free time together. Most of the time we talked. You'd tell me an aspect of your life and how you lived. You still stayed in your old house. Your parents never noticed the food that had gone missing, never noticed the extra room, or that you'd stolen the extra keys. One night, I confided in you that I was beginning to think you were a part of my imagination, Fight Club style. After all, what could you do to me that I couldn't do to myself? You spent the next month or so trying to leave bite marks on my ear or neck to prove a point. I still have a few scars on my ear, so I guess you did. Looking back, I could see the warning signs even then. Your skin seemed to get worse and worse, paler and paler, and you'd rub your eyes raw. It was in winter we had our wake-up call. The morning began like any other. I woke up, brushed my teeth, and started searching for clothes to wear. It was a winter morning, and my room was dark, so I didn't see your name on my arm. The cold sent shivers through my body and pulled out a long-sleeve jacket. A small bell rang in my head. Don't you usually roll your sleeves up? Yeah, and why did I? That was annoying. I finished tidying up and headed to school. On the school bus, I felt oddly content, like something I'd been worrying about had just disappeared. I walked up to the school stairs, down the hall, through my classroom door, and sat down at my desk. The same feeling of a burden forgotten hounded my mind. What was I forgetting? When recess came, I just sat at my desk while my classmates ran out. It felt like a ritual, but I didn't know what for. I was contemplating just walking out to join them when I heard it. It was something small in the wind, like a whisper, but it came over and over, incessant. It sounded like my name, I knew this was strange, that this was worth my attention, but I felt oddly calm. Everything would be all right. Everything would be fine. Just ignore it. I sat there at my desk, my mind a war zone between two conflicting, contradictory voices, when I felt a force tugging on my sleeve. The moment I noticed this, my jacket sleeve tore open. I saw your name on my arm, and then your hand that had ripped my jacket open. You'd been yelling at me for over 20 minutes. I think that was the moment we realized how on edge our friendship really was. One accident away from complete erasure. We spent most of the next year in the town library together, trying to find out what the fireflies were. It wasn't really a problem for me because of my mother's treatment. My family couldn't afford to go on any trips, and our house didn't have heating anymore, so I was happy to spend my time with you. Trying to find information was a puzzle in and of itself. After all, how would I read about people I couldn't remember? And how would you find out who was special when no one could even remember enough about them to record them? We found our old family trees and records. Individually, we'd write down the name of everyone in the book on 2 lists, and then we would compare. The names I hadn't remembered to write down, but you had, would become the focus. They were the names who were under the curse of the fireflies. We compiled a list of suspicious books. Books we thought could help us because they were written by, or were about, the people we were searching for. I read the books with the list of names side by side, reading it again for every page of the book. You scoured the internet on the library computers, on the lookout for articles about the people. Our search would lead us to the first glimpse we got of what was really happening to you. It was late at night when you found the picture. I was a bit drowsy at that time and almost about to nod off when I heard a sharp intake of breath. I turned to see you standing up, pointing at the screen. I didn't see anything. Well, anything noteworthy. On the screen was a picture of a clearing somewhere in the woods. You held up your piece of paper where you'd marked out 2 names. Ceci Appleby, Regan, 13. Terry Appleby Regan, 12. Siblings. For a moment, I saw the paper and the screen side by side. Side by side. And then I saw them. 2 figures emerging from the woods towards the camera. They were almost humanoid, with the exception of their limbs, which stretched to nightmarish proportions. Their blank, white skin was that of a pure albino, and looked more like tree bark than anything you expected to find on a mammal. A cloud of fireflies surrounded the duo. The shorter one looked emaciated. I could see their rib cages, around which their eyes. God, their eyes. So small, so red. The taller one, with its white hair, didn't look alive anymore. They were little more than skin wrapped around a skeleton. Fireflies swarmed out of the pair's empty eye sockets. Both reached for the cameraman. I looked at the article surrounding the picture. It was a blog posted by a hiker, 20 years after the last mention of the 2 kids. The picture was a mystery to the cameraman as well. He'd been wanting to go to the woods, pictured for a while now, but he never actually remembered going there. The picture had just appeared on his camera one day, out of the blue. For a moment, I looked at your face, your thin, pale face, with those red, veined eyes. Would that be you when my scar faded? Just a walking horror I'd glimpse, then forget? We worked through our reading list at a much faster pace, starting from that moment. Maybe we should have gone slower. At least every book, every website we'd left untouched, promised hope. The books that we finished and tossed aside promised nothing but the clearing in the woods as one's future. And we tossed aside a lot of books. I believe I tore through 3/4 of my reading list before I stumbled across the journal. Oh God, that horrible, horrible journal. The journal used to belong to a mental patient named Joey, who claimed to be a serial killer. He was locked up in an asylum when the police discovered his supposed victims never existed. He was diagnosed with a need for attention and shoved away. They should have electrocuted him. They should have fried him until his flesh melted and his hair burned. In the journal, he talked about how he carried out his killings. He knew things, bizarre and disturbing things no one else knew. He knew of strange creatures that lived in the woods. Of them, his favorites were the fireflies. I'm not going to tell you how he summoned these things. I trust you. I trust you more than anyone. But a thing like this belongs to the ground more than it ever will to the human mind. In the end, it's sufficient to know that these things were not fireflies. Joey would start his ritual by taking a kid, any kid, anyone he pleased. He could take them at any time, in the dead of the night from their own homes, or in broad daylight from their front yards. It didn't matter if he was seen. He'd take them to his house and drag them inside. Usually, an Amber Alert came up at that point. He didn't care. Like I said, it wouldn't matter soon. He dragged them to a special room in his house. Here, the fireflies would come and latch onto them. Now, nobody was searching for the kids. Not the police, not the parents, nobody. From then on, he could do whatever he wanted to the kid. He'd get bored of them after a day or two, after the child had broken. At that point, he disposed of them. Hacksaw, kitchen knife, anything would work. He detailed a large pit of bodies he kept in the woods, swarming with bugs. One day, I guess he got bored of that too, so he went right to the police station and turned himself in. Not on account of guilt, no. He just wanted someone to know about the stuff he was doing. That sick bastard. Oh, don't get the wrong idea. He never stopped killing kids. The asylum doors didn't stop him from doing what he liked. It just made him improvise. He made a new way. He modified the flies so they could survive without a host, just in a dormant state. When a child, he specified the age, would approach the swarm, it would latch on and begin its effect. Over the years, the child would warp horribly into the things we saw in the woods. I wished I could hate him in peace. I wish I could say the world owed him nothing, but that wouldn't be true. He detailed a way out. On the final page, there was an exact explanation on how to get rid of the fireflies. You must have seen something in my face because, at that moment, you asked if I had found anything. I said no and closed the book. A few minutes later, you shut down the computer. You picked up the last book and went through it yourself. When you reached the end cover, you tossed it aside. I asked what we should do now. You said it was all right. I could go home. We'd talk about it in the morning. I stood up and walked past the shelves of books. I headed for the library entrance, but stopped right outside the door and waited. I waited until I heard the sniffling sounds. I sneaked back to our table, where you were quietly sobbing. You had your head in your hands. I sat back down as you raised your eyes to me. You said you wished you'd never met me, how happy you were when you had nothing to lose, how I ruined your life. You'd never really gotten better at talking to people. That was the worst love confession I've ever heard. I remember how we kissed that night. I remember your hands gripping my hair. I remember that kiss. I wished it could have just been a kiss. I'm sorry I ruined that moment, when my arms were around you. I was close enough to still a firefly without you noticing. I remember holding the firefly in my hand. I remember how it struggled, until it didn't. Until it was a part of me. The fireflies shifted. They came over to me and left you. I remember the familiar look in your eyes, the confusion. I never wanted to see that confusion in your eyes ever again. You deserve to be loved, and you deserve to know that. I wasn't really living anyway. You reached for me. I pulled away, as the last lights of recognition faded from your eyes. And then, you were just staring at a stranger, walking away into a crowd of other strangers. That was a year ago. You've gotten so much better since then. You have so many friends now. So many people at your birthday party. You also look so much healthier. I haven't been as fortunate. My skin's gotten a lot paler, and my eyes hurt all the time now. I couldn't go to school like you did all those years. I haven't wasted my time, though. I found Joey's pit. The bodies. There were so many bodies. There's a grave for those children now. Without me, my mom could afford her surgery. She looked so happy. Just yesterday, I saw her playing with my baby brother. I saw you crying yesterday. You were with your friends, laughing. For a brief moment, your eyes met mine, and then they were so wet. I think I'm going away. For good, I think. You're not going to be happy if I stick around. I'm so happy I met you, even if you don't remember me. End of the note. Sometimes I go through depressive episodes. I feel so lonely, even with my friends. I don't know what's going through my head during these times. And sometimes I'd end up in a bathtub, a knife in my hands, and my wrists bleeding. Until now, I thought I was cutting my wrists. I wasn't. The cuts, they're letters. I've been carving a name into my arm. This next story was written by a dear friend of mine. The Honey-Eyed Lies of Jameson March. When Jameson March, owner of March Mortuaries, put a sign out in front of his business saying that he would be selling honey, people thought it must be a joke. What kind of mortician would sell honey? Would he sell it next to the caskets in his showroom? Would he offer it graveside at the cemetery? No one knew, but there was such speculation about that little sign. Those who asked Jameson were in for quite a treat. Jameson told them that he would be selling his honey right here at the mortuary, and even gave them a sample so they might tell their friends. What they sampled was supposedly the best honey any of them had ever eaten. They went on and on about the texture and the taste and the strange exotic flavors within the honey. They said how they couldn't wait for Jameson to sell his honey, and they would be buying as much as they could on the opening day. Others began to question where he was keeping his bees. They saw no beehives on his property, a 2-bedroom apartment above the mortuary. They saw no hives on the mortuary property at all, in fact. They saw no hives in the cemetery or near the crematorium, but still, the honey came. On the 3rd of March, the first jar of that miraculous concoction appeared in front of Jameson's mortuary. The mortuary was crowded for the next several days, and by Friday, not a jar was left to be purchased. Again, people praised the texture and the taste, as well as the myriad flavors that one would find within that jar. One of the buyers, Bert Lancaster, owned a large honey operation of his own. It is said that when he tasted Jameson honey, he proclaimed that no bee in his field had ever produced anything so sweet. Some would tell you that he burned his beehives that very afternoon, but that's a little more than town gossip. For that summer back in 1986, no one could get enough of Jameson's honey. They say Helen Price used that honey to defeat her rival, Linda Moore, in that summer's 4th of July dessert bake-off. They say Bert Cavell put that honey in his mead and could not make enough of it to satiate the local drunks. They say Mary Saunders was taken to the hospital over at Oakley when she had ate 10 jars in a day and was reaching for an 11th when her stomach ruptured. But again, that's all town gossip. What is fact was the discovery made by Randall Smith, a local tabloid writer, in the fall of '86. Randall had a reputation for being less of a journalist and more of a mudslinger. If there was a nasty rumor started, Randall could usually be traced back to it. He had grown pretty tired of hearing about Jameson and his amazing honey. Randall was of the opinion that if something was too good to be true, then it likely was. He thought Jameson's honey must have some sort of secret ingredient that got people addicted to it. Maybe it was even a cover for some kind of dope operation that Jameson was running out of the mortuary or the cemetery. Whatever the case, Randall could smell the story, and it would be sweeter than any nectar the old mortician could produce. So, one night, as the moon hung full over Pleasant Rest Cemetery, Randall and his friends, Rooster Mallory and Charles Drainer, took a trip out to the cemetery to have a look around. Someone had reported earlier that week that they had seen some larger than normal bees around the cemetery grounds, and speculated that these may be the source of Jameson's honey. It was the only lead that Randall had, and seemed as good a lead as any. So, after a couple of drinks at the Legion Hall, the three men piled into Rooster's old Chevy and headed down to do some late-night snooping. Randall still tells anyone who will listen how the graveyard was as silent as its namesake. The gate was locked, sporting a brand new Academy security lock, one of the big, thick gold ones that graced the sheds and fences of discerning security buffs in town. So, the three men had to find a different way in. This was strange, since the cemetery had never been locked before. Jameson had always let people come and go as they please, but just recently, the old man has gotten a little cagey about many things. For one, the cemetery was now locked after nightfall. For another, no one was allowed in the basement of the mortuary, not even the man who came to deliver the bodies from the families. For a third, no one but his two sons were allowed to work in the mortuary anymore, and both of them were under pain of death should they reveal the secret of Jameson's honey. The three men had walked around the cemetery fence before they found a spot where the last windstorm had knocked down a thick old pine. It lay on the sharp points around the top, creating a rude bridge over the wall. None of them being particularly spry, they had them all carefully shimmied up the fallen tree and then dropped down into the cemetery, careful not to get stuck on the spikes. They all felt a chill as they stood in the quiet boneyard, and Randall claims that Rooster looked ready to brave the spikes if it meant being out of there. The wind rattled the skeletal trees on the grounds, and the little flags that had been stuck on some of the graves for Labor Day snapped mischievously and startled them more than once. They had brought flashlights, but the big old trader's moon that looked down on them was more than enough to keep them from tripping into an open grave or smashing their shins on an ill-placed tombstone. The quiet cemetery was enough to sober even the bravest of them, and it was probably why they heard the shovels before they saw the men. Crouching behind a particularly large family headstone, Randall saw two men digging in a fresh grave. They were exhuming a body by the light of that pregnant moon, and Randall knew whose it was to boot. He had been to the widow Hadley's funeral that day, and it appeared that whoever these men were, they were taking her from her freshly dug plot. As they watched, the corpse flopped to the surface unceremoniously, followed by March's sons, Hannibal and Gavin. Hannibal hefted the body, leaving his younger brother to fill in the hole as he took it deeper into the cemetery. Gavin went to work and bent as he was. He didn't notice the three men as they snuck around him and followed his older brother. Hannibal had been a football player, a linebacker for the local high school team in his day. He toted the frail old woman as easily as someone might a sack of grain. As they followed him, the three men weren't sure what they expected to find, but Randall was certain it would be something that would add a macabre twinge to the story he was working on. They followed Hannibal as he came to a newly built mausoleum, the name across the door reading March. He unlocked the door and unceremoniously tossed the old woman into the crypt. The men hunkered low behind a pair of tombstones, but they needn't have bothered. Hannibal was a big boy, but his night eyes left something to be desired. He no more saw them than he did the place marker that he nearly tripped over on the way back to his brother. And as he stomped off into the cemetery, the three men approached the crypt. The mortuary was a nice new one, sunk into the ground a little to protect any caskets placed down there. It would have looked more at home in New Orleans than this Georgia backwater town. To the knowledge of anyone in town, the Marches did not have a family crypt until very recently. The only March buried there would be Jameson's wife, since his mother and father were buried up in Macon at their own family plot. Hannibal may not have been the smartest March in town, but it appeared he was smart enough to lock up behind himself. Another one of those big, thick locks that had been found on the front gate greeted them, and the three men were forced to prowl around the mausoleum to see what they could find. It was Charles who found the little vent in the mausoleum, but it was Randall who saw the horrors that lay inside. Randall and Rooster had been looking for a window, or perhaps another entrance, when Charles had come hoofing it back to them to say that he had found a little vent that opened into the crypt. Randall asked him to show them where it was, and the three men found a little opening big enough for a large child to fit inside. Charles and Rooster were pulp wooders and much too big to squeeze into holes. However, Randall had made a career of squeezing into places he was not wanted, opting to stick his head in to get a better look. Randall had his friend hold his legs while he shimmied into the vent. Charles and Rooster slid him in as far as they could, and they said his flashlight could be seen through the slats at the top of the mausoleum. When Randall started screaming and yelling for them to pull him out, it sounded like the devil himself had gotten a hold of him. When they pulled him out, they said he was white as a sheet, and said they had to tell the sheriff immediately. Whether the brothers were gone when they made their escape or not, they missed them entirely as they beat a retreat back to town. The sheriff took some convincing to get him out of bed, but when Randall told him what he had seen down in the crypt, he came with three other men and the biggest set of bolt cutters they could find at the station. Jameson's sons were leaving when the sheriff and his boys pulled up, so they didn't end up needing the bolt cutters after all. When he laid it out to the two young men that they could either cooperate or sit in the same prison cell that their father was about to occupy, they decided it might be in their best interest to show him what they'd been doing. When the sheriff asked the boys if they would need suits, the two shook their heads. "The bees are mostly docile," Hannibal told them. And sure enough, when they cracked the door, not a one came charging out. They descended into the ground, and by the light of the sheriff's flashlight, they saw the horrors below. The bees swarmed the small pile of corpses, taking whatever they used to make the honey back into the hives. The hives covered the walls of the crypt, making a sticky webwork of combs. The corpses down below were fresh, most of them having died very recently, and the bees were taking to them with gusto. The brothers said they came down once or twice a week to harvest the honey, and that the vulture bees were taking to the warm Georgia summers quite nicely. When the sheriff interrogated them, both said this had been their father's idea. He had read about the vulture bees and thought they sounded like an interesting idea. Then, when their mother died, he did a little experiment. He had put her in the mortuary basement and procured some vulture bees of his own. The boys had been horrified when he showed them what he'd been up to, but even they had to admit the honey had been the sweetest they ever had eaten. Something about the readily available nature of the local pollen, mixed with the bees' instinct to collect whatever they got from the corpses, had made for a potent and delicious treat. She was the catalyst for all of this, Hannibal had said. Those first few jars he handed out to the people for tasting were honey made from Mom's body. He began to cry then, but the sheriff had all the evidence that he needed to proceed. He arrested Jameson March that very night, but there seemed to be some confusion on what to charge him with. He couldn't really get him for murder because he hadn't killed anybody. He couldn't really get him for fraud because he buried those bodies just like he said he would. In the end, they got him on simple corpse desecration and misdemeanor fraud for not telling the families what he intended to do with the bodies. He got less than 5 years in prison, and I hear that the warden let him keep the beehives in the prison garden. Seems like his talents didn't go to waste even behind bars. He left town when his time was served, he and his boys. The funeral home has been empty ever since. The police found the beginnings of his beekeeping in the basement. That and a secondary hive with a swarm of angry vulture bees. Jameson tried to sell the mortuary, but nobody seemed to want the place with that sort of reputation. It collapsed under a late February snow back in 2012, and they destroyed the mortuary they found all those bodies in about a year after Jameson went to prison. And that's the sordid tale of Jameson March and his bees. I have no idea what they did with those bees after they turned them out of the March mausoleum. They likely just turned them loose into an environment that was alien to them. So, if you should be traveling through the Georgia back roads and see some larger than average bees, or taste sweeter than average honey, be very suspicious about its origins. I'm a private investigator in rural Oregon. In case you didn't know, the woods around here are effing scary. In 2016, despite how cliche it sounds, I was working as a private investigator in rural Oregon. Most people make the stereotype that private detectives and investigators have walk-in clients, but that simply isn't true. I get almost all of my cases from clients by phone, and the call I got in that June was no exception. The client, a man named Jonathan Alexander, was calling about the disappearance of his father, Sergio Alexander. Jonathan's father had gone missing ever since a solo deer hunting trip in the backwoods of our little Oregon town. And the search parties and official parties hadn't turned up anything. In most cases like this, you're looking for a body in the woods, not a live person. But Jonathan was hopeful, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. In this case, I took my go bag, a duffel bag, and its contents were a bottle of water, a first aid kit, my Taurus Raging Hunter, a bag of Ziploc bags, my wallet and phone, and food. A Taurus Raging Hunter revolver might have been overkill, but I was planning to go into the woods. And the woods can be a dangerous place. This part of Oregon was stocked full of cougars, mountain lions, bears, wolves, moose, and some others, and almost everyone carried a heavier firearm when going into the backwoods. The first place on my schedule was Jonathan's house, where I would meet him in person and have an interview. As I pulled up into his dirt driveway, I got a sense of the kind of person he was. His house was a 25-foot trailer stuck to the ground, with a backyard and patio facing the mountains. "Are you Jonathan?" I asked the man waiting for me. He was tall, at least 6'5", and wearing a checkered button-up, a trucker cap, and jeans. "Yeah," he replied. "You're Inspector Jacob, right? Come inside. I'll tell you the details. I also have some things that could help you, depending on how willing you are." I walked inside the trailer, and the interior was everything I expected. The walls were lined with taxidermied bass and catfish, as well as several mounted deer heads and rifles propped up on display. A dirty kitchen with piles of dishes was one corner, and a small two-person dinner table. Jonathan, John for short, and I sat down. Jonathan offered me a beer, but I declined. I never drank on a job. I started with the regular questions. Where was he last seen? Who was with him? What happened leading up to the night of the disappearance? John replied, telling the whole story. "My dad, Sergio, was a hunter and fisherman. Hunting and fishing was his life. He always had a rifle or a fishing rod. He's in his 60s and was in the military for 7 years. Had a few tours in Afghanistan. On that night, he wanted to go solo buck hunting in the evening, so I dropped him off in a dirt road near his favorite spot. He didn't come back for 2 days. This was somewhat normal. He sometimes hunted overnight or just got lost. After a week passed, I got really worried. I could feel that something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. I called the sheriff, and they organized a search party for 3 nights. We went in every direction, covered all the ground, and you know what? Not a single thing. Not a candy bar, no footsteps leading past his spot, no trail, nothing. After he was declared deceased, I went out myself to search. I know he's still out there. I know it. And where is this dirt road? John marked the road on the GPS on my phone, and I thanked him and left. I had a no solve, no pay rule, so I wouldn't get paid unless I actually found Sergio, dead or alive. My next stop was at the sheriff's office, in the middle of my small town. I drove past multiple roadside stores until I reached the parking lot of the sheriff's office. I parked and walked into the place, going up to the front desk, where a tall and skinny deputy was doing paperwork and chewing gum, presumably as a substitute for cigarettes. I told him that I was looking into the disappearance of Sergio Alexander, and he sent me to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a balding man in his 50s named Clyde, showed a forced smile as I walked inside. A stained American flag was pinned to the wall, along with dozens of missing person posters and wanted posters. "So, Inspector, is this missing guy a friend of yours?" he asked. "No," I replied. "A client wants me to find him. Sergio is the guy's dad." "Well, you're in luck," Clyde replied. "We haven't gotten much criminal activity, so I can show you some of the search party reports." Clyde reached into his desk and pulled out a stack of papers and photos, which I flicked through. One of the photos captured an image showing a trail of footprints, ending abruptly. "And what is this?" I asked. "It's the strangest part of the case. The footprints leading to Sergio's favorite hunting spot just stopped. No trail leading somewhere else. No tire tracks, no ATV tracks, nothing. It's like he just up and vanished into thin air." I sighed. This case was going to be a hard one. "What else of interest was there?" I asked, looking through the files. Clyde pulled out a satellite image of the woods, with a Sharpie written on the spot where Sergio had gone missing. "This is the entire area which we estimate that Sergio could have walked around in the time he was gone," Clyde stated. "We checked every bit of it, and guess what? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But there was one thing we found of interest." "Which is?" I asked. "There was a pattern. Every time we checked a place, we heard Sergio's radio coming from somewhere." I raised an eyebrow. Sheriff Clyde continued. "But it was very, very faint. Could barely hear it. And another strange thing was when we went to search for Sergio, in the entire area where he went missing, all the birds and animals were quiet, even the crickets. As soon as we left the area of the supposed disappearance, the sound all came back." I checked the watch. It was early evening. After jotting down all the notes I could gather, I thanked the sheriff and left. My next stop? The woods. By the time I pulled up to the dirt road in my pickup truck, it was well into getting dark. This wasn't the ideal time for me to search through the area and find clues. Every detective knows how important the first 45 hours are. The place was exactly as John had described it. It was extremely rural, just a few miles away from a mountain range, and it was completely silent. The forest should have been alive, with birds chirping, wild turkeys moving about, crickets chirping, but the night was dead. Turning on my headlamp, I found Sergio's footsteps from when he was last seen and started combing through the area. Just like Clyde and Jonathan had said, the trail abruptly stopped in the middle of the woods. Nothing. No other signs that Sergio was even there. It was as if he had just up and vanished. Suddenly, I heard some rustling behind me. It was fully dark by now, and nobody should have been there besides me. The sound came again, except it was now in front of me, but just out of the reach of my headlamp.
"Who's there?"
I yelled.
"Show yourself."
"I'm armed." For dramatization, I flicked the revolver holster for my Taurus on my belt. Suddenly, something tapped me right on the back. I didn't have time to pull out my gun, and considering that whoever was doing this was probably some drunk guy, I wouldn't need it. I turned and threw a Mike Tyson haymaker in the thing's direction, and ended up hitting a tree and nearly breaking my wrist. In the split second that I was proud of my Mike Tyson haymaker, I realized that I had punched a tree and that my knuckles were actually bleeding. Whoever was behind me, if there was someone behind me, they were long gone. And that was when the laughing started. Actually, it was more like cackling. Weird, crazy, and unnatural cackling. Whatever you'd call it, it was unsettling anyway. I pulled out my revolver, designed to drop bears, and fired a deafening shot into the air. The laughing, everything, stopped for a bit, and I almost put my guard down. Then, I heard something whisper, just an inch away from my ear. It said, "Leave this place." And the next thing I know, I heard the sound of a million running footsteps catching up to me. And I got the F out. I ran right out of the woods, fast enough to outrun Usain Bolt. Adrenaline is one heck of a drug. I jumped in my pickup truck, turned the engine, and peeled out of there, all in record time. Whatever was behind me was still chasing me behind the car. I looked into the rearview mirror to try to look at the thing, which was running at least 80 miles per hour to keep up with me. And I saw nothing. Well, it wasn't a conceptual nothing. It was nothing in the sense that it was nothing my brain could comprehend and understand. There was a huge, blurry shape running after me, dark as the night and fuzzy around the edges. It was as if somebody took a huge mass of static from an 80s TV, made it into some sort of creature, and put it on a dirt road at 9 o'clock to chase some poor private investigator. I turned the road, drove down the road until I reached the town. The thing was obviously gone. I parked at a gas station parking lot and threw up once my body realized how much running I had done. The next day, I headed to a woman named Meredith's house. I had heard about her from when I was at the bar the night I saw the demon thing by some paranormal junkies who were particularly interested in what I said. Meredith apparently owned a tea and plant shop at the edge of town, having the shop based on the first floor of her house. She also knew a thing or two about paranormal entities, the occult, monsters, ghouls, and, well, you get the gist. I pulled up into the driveway of her shop and knocked on the door. "We're closed, butthole," somebody, probably Meredith, yelled. I looked at the store hours taped on the front door. Today was a Friday, and according to her, probably outdated, store hours chart, she was, as a matter of fact, open. "You're open, so stop being lazy," I yelled right back. Meredith groaned and opened the triple-locked door. In person, she was a short Latina woman with long black hair and a purple beanie and wearing a trench coat and jeans, which was totally not suspicious. "Ugh, what do you want?" she snapped. "What I want is to know what is in those woods. And lady, don't piss me off. I'm still on a hangover. You study the paranormal and supernatural, or am I wrong?" "No, you're not wrong." "Good, because yesterday I got bullied and chased by some weird demon thing while looking for a missing man in his 60s. Meredith's face went pale. I taught myself how to learn and read expressions people make. And by the looks of it, she knew exactly what I was talking about. Come in. I might be able to help you." Like Jonathan's house, I was easily able to tell the interior of the house from the inside. There were plants everywhere, on the walls, growing in giant pots on the floor, as well as shelves stocked full of beakers and test tubes, and a few bags full of strange substances. I sat down on a worn-out couch while Meredith assessed my situation. "First of all, who told you about me?" she asked. "Some British fellow named Ron," I said. But then again, I was drunk, so he might have been a John or Bob. "How did you say this thing looked like?" Big, dark, blurry. I couldn't actually see it since it was at least 100 feet away, but it was running 80 miles per hour. Whatever it was. Huge. Must have been over 20 feet big. "Did you look at it directly?" Meredith asked. I answered plainly. "No. I looked at it through the rearview mirror, and even then I couldn't see it well." "Must be why you're alive." "What was that?" I asked. "What you just described is what we in the business call Nagagalakus." "Nagagalakus?" I muttered. "The heck is that?" "No one really knows," Meredith replied. "He, she, Whatever Nagalaku is ancient. Has been in these woods for probably over a century, and no one knows where he came from. You said you were looking for a missing guy, right? Well, Nagalaku probably took him. Nagalaku might eat him, might let him go, might keep him for eternity. I don't know. Then how do I kill this thing? I ask. I need to close this case. You probably can't, Meredith said. But whatever you do, don't look directly at Nagalaku, or your mind will literally melt at the unfathomable horror and you will die. Do not look at it. Don't look at the demon thing, I said. Gotcha. Do you have, any herbs or materials that will stop Nagalaku from hurting me or do anything? Yes, actually I do. It's white ash blessed by a shaman. If you sprinkle it over yourself or any weapons you have, it should be more effective against any supernatural thing. Meredith stood up and walked towards a cabinet and pulled out a large Ziploc bag of white ash, which seemed to glow and vibrate, and she handed it to me. This ain't free, she said. It's $100. I sighed and reached into my wallet and pulled out $100 in cash and handed it to Meredith in exchange for the white ash. Hey, Meredith called out as I packed up my stuff and headed for the door. Yeah? Be careful. Like that was even possible. I got out of there and drove to the gas station, where I planned to get my supplies to hunt Nagalaku and find Sergio Alexander. But before that, I needed to fuel up. I bought incendiary rounds for my revolver that the gas station surprisingly sold, and I ordered pineapple pizza while listening to Piano Man by Billy Joel. After I finished up and threw out my garbage, I had devised a plan, which involved flares, a bottle of vodka, a huge jug filled with gasoline, and a Molotov cocktail. The cashier, a guy named John, seemed very interested in the thing I bought from the gas station. He was a tall guy in his 50s, with a graying beard, a trucker cap, and a military attitude. What are all these things for? He asked, as I heaved the heavy gasoline tank onto the counter, along with some other flammable and extremely dangerous things. Oh, nothing, I answered, trying not to sound suspicious. Just trying to take care of a pest problem. But John didn't see that as nothing. You're going into the woods, ain't you? I was caught off guard at how easily and accurately he knew what I was doing. Yes, I replied. Well, I'm off work after this shift, so I'll come with you. Or I could just report to the police that a private investigator is buying suspicious amounts of flammables and gasoline, along with 45 Magnum incendiary rounds for a Taurus Raging Hunter revolver. You Army? I asked. Yeah, he replied. Been in the U.S. Marines and the Navy for a couple of years. Had 5 tours in Afghanistan. I didn't see any reason why John shouldn't come with me. And besides, I could use his military and combat skills, which might be useful. And I wasn't going to carry a 55-gallon tank full of gasoline in the middle of the woods alone.
Fine,
I said.
let's do this.
A few hours later, just as the sun was setting, John and I got out of my pickup truck in front of the woods. John had brought his trusty 12-gauge, packed with dragon's breath incendiary rounds, and a mini flamethrower. John would be my backup and the bait, while I carried the gasoline tank, duct-taped to an explosive Molotov cocktail. The plan was we would go to the woods, to the spot where I had last been attacked by Sagoth, and wait. Once we heard a sign of him, we would both put on our blindfolds to avoid having our souls sucked out by the unfathomable sight of the eldritch cosmic horror. "Ready?" John asked.
Yeah,
I said.
just don't shoot me while you have your blindfold on.
We walked into the woods in silence, and after a mile or so, I reached the spot where Sergio was last seen. We sat there and waited an hour or so, until all the noise suddenly stopped, and I heard the sound of something massive dragging across the forest floor.
Put on your blindfold,
I said, putting on mine.
we can't risk seeing this thing.
John nodded, grinned, and put the blindfold on. Whatever it was sounded massive. It said in a demonic and ancient voice, "Leave this place." John and I fired a shot into the direction of the voice, and although my bullet missed by a mile, the old man's shot was a direct hit. Although I couldn't hear it, I saw the light from the blast of fire, sparks, and flames coming from the barrel of John's shotgun, and it hit the demon monster. The thing screeched, and we moved back a few steps, still blind. And without warning, the ground opened beneath us.
What the
John and I fell into the cavern beneath us, 6 feet down.
You okay?
I asked. "Never been better," John replied. "What is this place?" I lifted my blindfold and looked around to see that we had fallen into a subterranean tunnel that led deeper into the earth.
Anyone there? Effing help.
A voice screamed, presumably Sergio's, based on the circumstances. We ran down the tunnel and searched for Sergio, and we found the man lying on the cave floor with a broken leg.
We're gonna get you out of here,
I said. I heard a screech come from the entrance of the tunnel as Nagagalaku crawled down, breaking the walls. I reached down and picked up the tank of gasoline, had my eyes closed, and waited until Nagagalaku was just close enough my heart beating. Get out. I lit the Molotov, yelled at John to take cover, just as Nagalaku got within a dozen meters in our range. I had previously sprinkled the white ash Meredith had given me on the gasoline tank for extra effectiveness, and so that could kill Nagalaku if the explosion didn't. Nagalaku was a few meters away from us. I lit the gasoline bomb and threw it, and as it exploded, I grinned. Oh, gotcha, asshole. So, the funny thing is, a group of redneck hunters found us later. They had apparently found the hole in the explosion crater and investigated. John and I had suffered some mild burns from the enormous gasoline explosion, but the missing guy, Sergio, came out harmless besides the broken leg he already had before. The redneck family dragged us all the way to their pickup truck, then drove us to the hospital, where we both got treated for our injuries. Sergio was found and reunited after a long disappearance, and Jonathan paid me in the thousands, with the money I didn't expect him to have. When I went back to the place where Sergio had disappeared, and where I had blown Nagalaku high to the sky, I found a very strange, giant, half-human skeleton where I remembered Nagalaku getting blown up. Sergio Alexander was found, and I had killed one of the things that went bump in the night. Case closed. Don't F with the woods, kids. And just as an added bonus, because I appreciate each and every last one of you, I'm going to include 2 more stories. Enjoy. Psychosis. Sunday. I'm not sure why I'm writing this down on paper and not on my computer. I guess I've just noticed some odd things. It's not that I don't trust the computer. I just need to organize my thoughts. I need to get down all the details somewhere objective. Somewhere I know that what I write can't be deleted or changed. Not that that's happened. It's just everything blurs together here, and the fog of memory lends a strange cast to things. I'm starting to feel cramped in this small apartment. Maybe that's the problem. I just had to go and choose the cheapest apartment, the only one in the basement. The lack of windows down here makes day and night seem to slip by seamlessly. I haven't been out in a few days because I've been working on this programming project so intensely. I suppose I just wanted to get it done. Hours of sitting and staring at a monitor can make anyone feel strange. Might know, but I don't think that's it. I'm not sure when I first started to feel like something was odd. I can't even define what it is. Maybe I just haven't talked to anyone in a while. That's the first thing that crept up on me. Everyone I normally talk to online while I program has been idle, or they've simply not logged on at all. My instant messages go unanswered. The last email I got from anybody was a friend saying he'd talk to me when he got back from the store. And that was yesterday. I'd call with my cell phone, but reception's terrible down here. Yeah, that's it. I just need to call someone. I'm going to go outside. Well, that didn't work so well. As the tingle of fear fades, I'm feeling a little ridiculous for being scared at all. I look in the mirror before I went out, but I didn't shave the 2-day stubble I've grown. I figured I was just going out for a quick cell phone call. I did change my shirt though, because it was lunchtime, but I guessed that I'd run into at least one person I knew. That didn't end up happening. I wish it did. When I went out, I opened the door to my small apartment, slowly. A small feeling of apprehension had somehow already lodged itself in me. For some indefinable reason, I chalked it up to having not spoken to anyone but myself for a day or two. I peered down the dingy gray hallway, made dingier by the fact that it was a basement hallway. On one end, a large metal door led to the building's furnace room. It was locked, of course. 2 dreary soda machines stood by it. I bought a soda from one the first day I moved in, but it had a 2-year-old expiration date. I'm fairly sure nobody knows those machines are even down here. Or my cheap landlady just doesn't care to get them restocked. I closed my door softly and walked the other direction, taking care not to make a sound. I have no idea why I chose to do that, but it was fun giving in to the strange impulse not to break the droning hum of the soda machines, at least for the moment. I got to the stairwell and took the stairs up to the building's front door. I looked through the heavy door's small square window and received quite the shock. It was definitely not lunchtime. City gloom hung over the dark street outside, and the traffic lights at the intersection in the distance blinked yellow. Dim clouds, purple and black from the glow of the city, hung overhead. Nothing moved, save the few sidewalk trees that shifted in the wind. I remember shivering, though I wasn't cold. Maybe it was the wind outside. I could vaguely hear it through the heavy metal door, and I knew it was that unique kind of late-night wind, the kind that was constant, cold and quiet, save for the rhythmic music it made as it passed through countless unseen tree leaves. I decided not to go outside. Instead, I lifted my cell phone to the door's little window and checked the signal meter. The bars filled up the meter, and I smiled. Time to hear someone else's voice. I remember thinking relieved. It was just a strange thing, to be afraid of nothing. I shook my head, laughing at myself silently. I hit speed dial for my best friend Amy's number and held the phone up to my ear. It rang once, but then it stopped. Nothing happened. I listened to silence for a good 20 seconds, then hung up. I frowned and looked at the signal meter again. Still full, I went to dial her number again, but then my phone rang in my hand, startling me. I put it up to my ear.
Hello?
I asked, immediately fighting down a small shock at hearing the first spoken voice in days, even if it was my own. I had gotten used to the droning hum of the building's inner workings, my computer, and the soda machines in the hallway. There was no response to my greeting at first, but then, finally, a voice came. "Hey," said a clear male voice, obviously of college age like me. "Who's this?"
John?
I replied, confused. "Oh, sorry, wrong number," he replied, then hung up. I lowered the phone slowly and leaned against the thick brick wall of the stairwell. That was strange. I looked at my received call list, but the number was unfamiliar. Before I could think on it further, the phone rang loudly, shocking me again. This time, I looked at the caller before I answered. It was another unfamiliar number. This time, I held the phone up to my ear, but said nothing. I heard nothing but the general background noise of a phone. Then, a familiar voice broke my tension.
John?
Was the single word in Amy's voice. I breathed a sigh of relief.
Oh, hey, it's you,
I replied.
Who else would it be?
She responded.
Oh, the number. I'm at a party on 7th Street and my phone died just as you called me. This is someone else's phone, obviously. Okay,
I said.
Where are you?
She asked. My eyes glanced over the drab whitewash cylinder block walls and the heavy metal door with its small window.
At my building?
I sighed.
Just feeling cooped up. I didn't realize it was so late. You should come here,
she said, laughing.
No, I don't feel like looking for some strange place by myself in the middle of the night,
I said, looking out the window at the silent, windy street that secretly scared me just a tiny bit.
I think I'm just going to keep working or go to bed. Nonsense, she replied. I can come get you. Your building is close to 7th Street, right? How drunk are you? I said lightheartedly. You know where I live. Oh, of course, she said abruptly. I guess I can't get there by walking, huh? You could if you wanted to waste half an hour, I told her. Right, she said. Okay, have to go. Good luck with your work.
I lowered the phone once more, looking at the numbers flash as the call ended. Then, the droning silence suddenly reasserted itself in my ears. The two strange calls in the eerie street outside just drove home my aloneness in this empty stairwell. Perhaps from having seen too many scary movies, I had the sudden, inexplicable idea that something could look in the door's window and see me. Some sort of horrible entity that hovered at the edge of aloneness, just waiting to creep up on unsuspecting people that strayed too far from other human beings. I knew the fear was irrational, but nobody else was around, So, I jumped down the stairs, ran down the hallway into my room, and closed the door as swiftly as I could, while still staying silent. Like I said, I feel a little ridiculous for being scared of nothing, and the fear has already faded. Writing this down helps a lot. It makes me realize that nothing is wrong. It filters out half-formed thoughts and fears and leaves only cold, hard facts. It's late. I got a call from a wrong number, and Amy's phone died. So she called me back from another number. Nothing strange is happening. Still, there was something a little off about that conversation. I knew it could have just been the alcohol she'd had. Or was it even her that seemed off to me? Or was it... Yes, that was it. I didn't realize it until this moment, writing these things down. I knew writing things down would help. She said she was at a party, but I only heard silence in the background. Of course, that doesn't mean anything in particular, as she could have just gone outside to make the call. No, that couldn't be it either. I didn't hear the wind. I need to see if the wind is still blowing. Monday. I forgot to finish writing last night. I'm not sure what I expected to see when I ran up the stairwell and looked out the heavy metal door's window. I'm feeling ridiculous. Last night's fear seems hazy and unreasonable to me now. I can't wait to go out into the sunlight. I'm going to check my email, shave, shower, and finally get out of here. Wait, I think I heard something. It was thunder. That whole sunlight and fresh air thing didn't happen. I went out into the stairwell and up the stairs, only to find disappointment. The heavy metal door's little window showed only flowing water, as torrential rain slammed against it. Only a very dim, gloomy light filtered in through the rain. But at least I knew it was daytime, even if it was gray, sickly, wet outside. I tried looking out the window and waiting for lightning to illuminate the gloom. But the rain was too heavy, and I couldn't make out anything more than vague, weird shapes, moving at odd angles in the waves washing down the window. Disappointed, I turned around, and I didn't want to go back to my room. Instead, I wandered further up the stairs, past the first floor and the second. The stairs ended at the third floor, the highest floor in the building. I looked through the glass that ran up the outer wall of the stairwell, but it was that warped, thick kind that scatters the light. Not that there was much to see through the rain to begin with. I opened the stairwell door and wandered down the hallway. The 10 or so thick wooden doors, painted blue a long time ago, were all closed. I listened as I walked, but it was the middle of the day, so I wasn't surprised that I heard nothing but the rain outside. As I stood there in the dim hallway, listening to the rain, I had the strange, fleeting impression that the doors were standing like silent granite monoliths erected by some ancient, forgotten civilization for some unfathomable guardian purpose. Lightning flashed, And I could have sworn that, just for a moment, the old grainy blue wood looked just like rough stone. I laughed at myself for letting my imagination get the best of me. And then it occurred to me that the dim gloom and lightning must mean there was a window somewhere in the hallway. A vague memory surfaced, and I suddenly recalled that the third floor had an alcove and an inset window halfway down the floor's hallway. Excited to look out into the rain and possibly see another human being, I quickly walked over to the alcove, finding the large, thin glass window. Rain washed down it, as with the front door's window, but I could open this one. I reached a hand out to slide it open, but hesitated. I had the strangest feeling that if I opened that window, I would see something absolutely horrifying on the other side. Everything's been so odd lately, so I came up with a plan, and I came back here to get what I needed. I don't seriously think anything will come of it, but I'm bored, it's raining, and I'm going stir crazy. I came back to get my webcam. The cord isn't long enough to reach the third floor by any means. So, instead, I'm going to hide it between the two soda machines in the dark end of my basement hallway. Run the wire along the wall and under my door, and put black duct tape over the wire to blend it in with a black plastic strip that runs along the base of the hallway's walls. I know this is silly, but I don't have anything better to do. Well, nothing happened. I propped open the hallway to stairwell door, steeled myself, then flung the heavy front door wide open, and ran like hell down the stairs to my room and slammed the door. I watched the webcam on my computer intently, seeing the hallway outside my door and most of the stairwell. I'm watching it right now, and I don't see anything interesting. I just wish the camera's position was different, so that I could see out the front door. Hey, somebody's online. I got out an older, less functional webcam that I had in my closet to video chat with my friend online. I couldn't really explain to him why I wanted to video chat, but it felt good to see another person's face. He couldn't talk very long, and we didn't talk about anything meaningful, but I feel much better. My strange fear has almost passed. I would feel completely better, but there was something odd about our conversation. I know that I've said that everything has seemed odd, but still, he was very vague in his responses. I can't recall one specific thing that he said. No particular name or place or event, but he did ask for my email address to keep in touch. Wait, I just got an email. I'm about to go out. I just got an email from Amy that asked me to meet her for dinner at the place we usually go to. I do love pizza, and I've just been eating random food from my poorly stocked fridge for days, so I can't wait. Again, I feel ridiculous about the odd couple of days I've been having. I should destroy this journal when I get back. Oh, another email. Oh my God. I almost left the email and opened the door. I almost opened the door. But I read the email first. It was from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long time, and it was sent to a huge number of emails. That must have been every person he had saved in his address list. It had no subject, and it said simply, "Seen with your own eyes, don't trust them they." What the hell is that supposed to mean? The words shock me, and I keep going over and over them. Is it a desperate email sent just as something happened? The words are obviously cut off without finishing. On any other day, I would have dismissed this as spam from a computer virus or something. But the words, "seen with your own eyes." I can't help but read over this journal and think back on the last few days and realize that I have not seen another person with my own eyes, or talked to another person face to face. The webcam conversation with my friend was so strange, so vague, so eerie, now that I think about it. Was it eerie? Or is the fear clouding my memory? My mind toys with the progression of events I've written here, pointing out that I have not been presented with one single fact that I did not specifically give out unsuspectingly. The random wrong number that got my name, and the subsequent strange return call from Amy, the friend that asked for my email address. I messaged him first when I saw him online. And then I got my first email a few minutes after that conversation. Oh my God, that phone call with Amy. I said over the phone, I said that I was within half an hour's walk of 7th Street. They know I'm near there. What if they're trying to find me? Where is everyone else? Why haven't I seen or heard anyone else in days? No, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. I need to calm down. The madness needs to end. I don't know what to think. I ran about my apartment furiously, holding my cell phone up to every corner to see if it got a signal through the heavy walls. Finally, in the tiny bathroom, near one ceiling corner, I got a single bar. Holding my phone there, I sent a text message to every number in my list. Not wanting to betray anything about my unfounded fears, I simply sent, "You seen anyone face to face lately?" At that point, I just wanted any reply back. I didn't care what the reply was, or if I embarrassed myself. I tried to call someone a few times, but I couldn't get my head up high enough. And if I brought my cell phone down even an inch, it lost signal. Then I remembered the computer and rushed over to it, instant messaging everyone online. Most were idle or away from their computer. Nobody responded. My messages grew more frantic, and I started telling people where I was and to stop by in person for a host of barely passable reasons. I didn't care about anything by that point. I just needed to see another person. I also tore apart my apartment looking for something that I might have missed. Some way to contact another human being without opening the door. I know it's crazy. I know it's unfounded, but what if? What if? I just need to be sure. I taped the phone to the ceiling in case. Tuesday. The phone rang. Exhausted from last night's rampage, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up to the phone ringing and ran into the bathroom, stood on the toilet, and flipped open the phone taped to the ceiling. It was Amy, and I feel so much better. She was really worried about me, and apparently had been trying to contact me since the last time I talked to her. She's coming over now, and yes, she knows where I am without me telling her. I feel so embarrassed. I am definitely throwing this journal away before anyone sees it. I don't even know why I'm writing in it now. Maybe it's just because it's the only communication I've had at all since, God knows when. I look like hell, too. I looked in the mirror before I came back in here. My eyes are sunken, my stubble is thicker, and I just look generally unhealthy. My apartment is trashed, but I'm not going to clean it up. I think I need someone else to see what I've been through. These past few days have not been normal. I am not one to imagine things. I know I have been the victim of extreme probability. I probably missed seeing another person a dozen times. I just happened to go out when it was late at night, or the middle of the day when everyone was gone. Everything's perfectly fine. I know this now. Plus, I found something in the closet last night that has helped me tremendously. A television. I set it up just before I wrote this, and it's on in the background. Television has always been an escape for me, and it reminds me that there's a world beyond these dingy brick walls. I'm glad Amy's the only one that responded to me after last night's frantic pestering of everyone I could contact. She's been my best friend for years. She doesn't know it, but I count the day that I met her among one of the few moments of true happiness in my life. I remember that warm summer day fondly. It seems a different reality from this dark, rainy, lonely place. I feel like I spent days sitting in that playground, much too old to play, just talking with her and hanging around doing nothing at all. I still feel like I can go back to that moment sometimes, and it reminds me that this damn place is not all that there is. Oh, finally, a knock on the door. I thought it was odd that I couldn't see her through the camera I hid between the two soda machines. I figured that it was bad positioning, like when I couldn't see out the front door. I should have known. I should have known. After the knock, I yelled through the door jokingly that I had a camera between the soda machines, because I was embarrassed myself that I had taken this paranoia so far. After I did that, I saw her image walk over to the camera and look down at it. She smiled and waved. "Hey," she said to the camera, brightly, giving it a wry look. "It's weird, I know," I said into the mic, attached to my computer. "I've had a weird few days." "Must have," she replied. "Open the door, John." I hesitated. How could I be sure? "Hey, humor me a second here," I told her through the mic. "Tell me one thing about us. Just prove to me you're you." She gave the camera a weird look. All right," she said slowly, thinking. "We met randomly at a playground when we were both way too old to be there? I sighed deeply as reality returned and fear faded. God, I'd been so ridiculous. Of course it was Amy. That day wasn't anywhere in the world except in my memory. I'd never even mentioned it to anyone, not out of embarrassment, but out of a strange secret nostalgia and a longing for those days to return. If there was some unknown force at work trying to trick me, as I feared, there was no way they could know about that day. All right, I'll explain everything, I told her. Be right there. I ran to my small bathroom and fixed my hair as best as I could. I looked like hell, but she would understand. Snickering at my own unbelievable behavior and the mess I'd made of the place, I walked to the door. I put my hand on the doorknob and gave the mess one last look. So ridiculous, I thought. My eyes traced over the half-eaten food lying on the ground, the overflowing trash bin, and the bed I'd tipped to the side looking for God knows what. I almost turned to the door and opened it, but my eyes fell on one last thing. The old webcam, the one I used for that eerily vacant chat with my friend. Its silent black sphere laying haphazardly tossed to the side, its lens pointed at the table where this journal lay. An overwhelming terror took me as I realized that if something could see through that camera, it would have seen what I just wrote about that day. I asked her for any one thing about us, and she chose the only thing in the world that I thought they or it did not know. But it did. It did know. It could have been watching me the whole time. I didn't open the door. I screamed. I screamed in uncontrollable terror. I stomped on the old webcam on the floor. The door shook and the doorknob tried to turn, but I didn't hear Amy's voice through the door. Was the basement door made to keep out drafts too thick? Or was Amy not outside? What could have been trying to get in, if not her? What the hell is out there? I saw her on my computer through the camera outside. I heard her on the speakers through the camera outside. But was it real? How can I know? She's gone now. I screamed and shouted for help. I piled up everything in my apartment against the front door. Friday. At least I think it's Friday. I broke everything electronic. I smashed my computer to pieces. Every single thing on there could have been accessed by network access or, worse, altered. I'm a programmer, I know. Every little piece of information I gave out since this started. My name, my email, my location. None of it came back from outside until I gave it out. I've been going over and over what I wrote. I've been pacing back and forth, alternating between stark terror and overpowering disbelief. Sometimes I'm absolutely certain some phantom entity is dead set on the simple goal of getting me to go outside. Back to the beginning, with the phone call from Amy. She was effectively asking me to open the door and go outside. I keep running it through my head. One point of view says I've acted like a madman And all of this is the extreme convergence of probability. Never going outside at the right time by pure luck. Never seeing another person by pure chance. Getting a random nonsense email from some computer virus at just the right time. The other point of view says that extreme convergence of probability is the reason that whatever's out there hasn't gotten me already. I keep thinking, I never opened the window on the 3rd floor. I never opened the front door until that incredibly stupid stunt with the hidden camera, after which I ran straight to my room and slammed the door. I haven't opened my own solid door since I flung open the front door of the building. Whatever's out there, if anything's out there, never made an appearance in the building before I opened the front door. Maybe the reason it wasn't in the building already was that it was elsewhere getting everyone else. And then it waited until I betrayed my existence by trying to call Amy. A call which didn't work until it called me and asked me my name. Terror literally overwhelms me every time I try to fit the pieces of this nightmare together. That email, short, cut off. Was it from someone trying to get word out? Some friendly voice desperately trying to warn me before it came. Seen with my own eyes, don't trust them. Exactly what I've been so suspicious of. It could have masterful control of all things electronic, practicing its insidious deception to trick me into coming outside. Why can't it get in? It knocked on the door. It must have some solid presence. The door. The image of those doors in the upper hallway as guardian monoliths flashes back in my mind every time I trace this path of thoughts. If there is some phantom entity trying to get me to go outside, maybe it can't get through the doors. I keep thinking back over all the books I've read or movies I've seen, trying to generate some explanation for this. Doors have always been such intense foci of human imagination, always seen as wards or portals of special importance. Or perhaps the door is just too thick. I know that I couldn't bash through any of the doors in this building, let alone the heavy basement ones. Aside from that, the real question is, why does it even want me? If it just wanted to kill me, it could do it any number of ways, including just waiting until I starved to death. What if it doesn't want to kill me? What if it has some far more horrific fate in store for me? God, what can I do to escape this nightmare? A knock on the door. I told the people on the other side of the door I need a minute to think and I'll come out. I'm really just writing this down so I can figure out what to do. At least this time I heard their voices. My paranoia, and yes, I recognize I'm being paranoid, has me thinking of all sorts of ways that their voices could be faked electronically. There could be nothing but speakers outside, simulating human voices. Did it really take them 3 days to come talk to me? Amy is supposedly out there, along with 2 policemen and a psychiatrist. Maybe it took them 3 days to think of what to say to me. The psychiatrist's claim could be pretty convincing, if I decided to think this has all been a crazy misunderstanding, and not some entity trying to trick me into opening the door. The psychiatrist had an older voice. Authoritarian, but still caring. I liked it. I'm desperate just to see someone with my own eyes. He said I have something called cyberpsychosis, and I'm just one of a nationwide epidemic of thousands of people having breakdowns triggered by a suggestive email that got through somehow. I swear he said, got through somehow. I think he means spread throughout the country inexplicably, but I'm incredibly suspicious that the entity slipped up and revealed something. He said I'm part of a wave of emergent behavior, that a lot of other people are having the same problem with the same fears, even though we've never communicated. That neatly explains the strange email about eyes that I got. I didn't get the original triggering email. I got a descendant of it. My friend could have broken down too and tried to warn everyone he knew against his paranoid fears. That's how the problem spreads, the psychiatrist claims. I could have spread it too, with my texts and instant messages online to everybody I know. One of those people might be melting down right now after being triggered by something I sent them. Something they might interpret any way that they want. Something like a text saying, "Seen anyone face to face lately?" The psychiatrist told me that he didn't want to lose another one. That people like me are intelligent, and that's our downfall. We draw connections so well that we draw them even when they shouldn't be there. He said it's easy to get caught up in paranoia in our fast-paced world, a constantly changing place with more and more of our interaction is simulated. I have to give him one thing. It's a great explanation. It neatly explains everything. It perfectly explains everything, in fact. I have every reason to shake off this nightmarish fear that something or consciousness or being out there wants me to open the door so it can capture me for some horrible fate worse than death. It would be foolish, after hearing that explanation, to stay in here until I starve to death, just to spite the entity that might have got everyone else. It might be foolish to think that after hearing that explanation. I might be one of the last people left alive on an empty world, hiding in my secure basement room, spiting some unthinkable deceptive entity just by refusing to be captured. It's a perfect explanation for every single strange thing I've seen or heard, and I have every reason in the world to let all of my fears go and open the door. That's exactly why I'm not going to. How can I be sure? How can I know what's real and what's deception? All of these damn things with their wires and their signals that originate from some unseen origin. They're not real. I can't be sure. Signals through a camera, faked videos, deceptive phone calls, emails, even the television lying broken on the floor. How can I possibly know it's real? It's just signals, waves, light. The door. It's bashing on the door. It's trying to get in. What insane mechanical contrivance could it be using to simulate the sound of men attacking the heavy wood so well? At least I'll finally see it with my own eyes. There's nothing left in here for it to deceive me with. I've ripped apart everything else. It can't deceive my eyes, can it? Seen with your own eyes, don't trust them, Wait, was that desperate message telling me to trust my eyes? Or warning me about my eyes too? Oh my God, what's the difference between a camera and my eyes? They both turn light into electrical signals. They're the same. I can't be deceived. I have to be sure. I have to be sure. Date unknown. I calmly asked for paper and a pen, day in and day out, until it finally gave them to me. Not that it matters. What am I going to do? Poke my eyes out? The bandages feel like part of me now. The pain is gone. I figure this will be one of my last chances to write legibly, as, without my sight to correct mistakes, my hands will slowly forget the motions involved. This is a sort of self-indulgence, this writing. It's a relic of another time, because I'm certain everyone left in the world is dead, or something far worse. I sit against the padded wall day in and day out. The entity brings me food and water. It masks itself as a kind nurse, as an unsympathetic doctor. I think it knows that my hearing has sharpened considerably, now that I live in darkness. It fakes conversations in the hallways, on the off chance that I might overhear. One of the nurses talks about having a baby soon. One of the doctors lost his wife in a car accident. None of it matters. None of it is real. None of it gets to me. Not like she does. That's the worst part. The part I almost can't handle. The thing comes to me, masquerading as Amy. Its recreation is perfect. It sounds exactly like Amy. Feels exactly like her. It even produces a reasonable facsimile of tears that it makes me feel on its lifelike cheeks. When it first dragged me here, it told me all the things I wanted to hear. It told me that she loved me, that she had always loved me, that it didn't understand why I did this, that we could still have a life together. If only I would stop insisting that I was being deceived. It wanted me to believe. No, it needed me to believe that she was real. I almost fell for it. I really did. I doubted myself for the longest time. In the end, though, it was all too perfect, too flawless, and too real. The false Amy used to come every day, and then every week, and finally stopped coming altogether. But I don't think the entity will give up. I think the waiting game is just another one of its gambits. I will resist it for the rest of my life if I have to. I don't know what happened to the rest of the world, but I do know that this thing needs me to fall for its deceptions. If it needs that, then maybe, just maybe, I am a thorn in its agenda. Maybe Amy is still alive out there somewhere, kept alive only by my will to resist the deceiver. I hold on to that hope, rocking back and forth in my cell to pass the time. I will never give in. I will never break. I am a hero. The doctor read the paper the patient had scribbled on. It was barely readable, written in the shaky script of one who could not see. He wanted to smile at the man's steadfast resolve, a reminder of the human will to survive. but he knew that the patient was completely delusional. After all, a sane man would have fallen for the deception long ago. The doctor wanted to smile. He wanted to whisper words of encouragement to the delusional man. He wanted to scream, but the nerve filaments wrapped around his head and into his eyes made him do otherwise. His body walked into the cell like a puppet and told the patient once more that he was wrong and that there was nobody trying to deceive him. And this last story comes from my dear friend, Jay Campbell. The tapping of the keys. My dad died nearly 2 years ago, and we just buried him today. Dad was a writer, though you probably never heard of him. He was known in small circles, celebrated by the community where he lived, but his books will likely never grace the shelves of Barnes & Noble. I say that like it's a fact, but that may not be the case anymore. Dad, like one of those old painters from the 1800s, became infinitely more famous in his death than he ever did in life. People who wouldn't return his calls and wouldn't even think of publishing his work now come to see him from miles away. This probably seems strange, given I just told you he's dead. So, let me start at the beginning. Dad died as he lived, at his keyboard. He's been writing the same book for as long as I can remember. It's a massive 7 or 8 volume series. In one of my earliest memories, I can remember toddling into his office and looking up at him as he smiled at me, his fingers never leaving the keyboard as he plinked away. Dad wrote other things for magazines or freelance work, but the books were his magnum opus. He would tell anyone who would listen, usually interested friends of mine who were aspiring writers themselves, how the book would be his greatest work once it was done. He had envisioned 10 books in all, detailing the hero's journey of his main character as he attempted to find his father's murderer across several continents, meeting people and finding clues along the way. I've heard him talk about that book almost every day since I was old enough to understand what he was talking about, but I couldn't tell you much about it. He never let anybody read it. He was so protective of it, and I don't know if more than a dozen people were aware of its existence. That being said, he was always in his study when he had time, tapping away at the keys and refining his manuscript for the day. It would be picked up by an editor. I was the one who found him, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was getting ready for college, packing up my things and moving out, and I came to see if he would help me move some furniture onto the truck. He had been in his office all day, and I thought maybe he was mad at me. I knew he didn't want me to leave. He was sad to see me go, but he had to understand that I had to go to college. I had a full ride scholarship I'd be a fool not to use, and living on campus would give me access to resources I wouldn't have at home. It seemed like the best choice to move out, but I couldn't believe he couldn't see that. So, when I stuck my head in and asked him, I was surprised when he didn't turn around. That only seemed to cement in my head the idea that he was mad at me. He had his back to the door as he always did, fingers tapping away, and when he didn't say anything, I just stood there and looked at the back of his head for a moment. He had a bald spot forming, the hair receding away from the center, and I thought it a little sad to watch my dad aging in such an obvious way. I asked him again, his fingers never slowing, but when he didn't say anything, I went downstairs and managed to manhandle the desk down into the U-Haul. I decided I wouldn't bother him if he wanted to act like this. He would fold when it came time for me to leave, apologizing for acting like this, and we would have a hug before I drove off into the sunset. Around lunchtime, I looked at my now empty room and realized I was finished packing. Mom was at work at the post office, and I had planned to swing in and say bye on my way out of town. We had said our goodbyes that morning, with lots of tears and hugs over breakfast, and Dad was the only one I felt I still needed to say goodbye to. So, I went upstairs again, saying I needed to leave and wondering if he'd come and give me a hug. His fingers just kept tapping away uninterrupted. "Come on, Dad," I said, stepping inside as he continued to ignore me. "I know you're bummed about this, but it's time for me to get out there and make it on my own. It's not like I'll never be back again. You'll see me on Thanksgiving. That's less than..." But when I put my hand on his shoulder, I noticed how cold it was. Dad had been up here for 3 days writing, and Mom said she didn't think he'd come to bed at all in that time. This wasn't uncommon for Dad. He would hyperfixate on a project or revisions and lose days at a time. His office was towards the back of the house on the second floor, so without foot traffic or noise, he could lose himself for days as he worked. He usually came down for food after everyone was asleep, but I couldn't remember hearing him stumbling around lately. I turned him towards me, his hands moving comically in front of him as he swung away from the desk. And as he came away, he began to scream as if someone were stabbing him. I stumbled away, taking in his long face and sunken eyes, and found myself running from the room as I grabbed the phone out of my pocket. Mom said she'd be home immediately, and I waited downstairs. I could still hear him screaming from his office. Mom came home in a rush, going up the stairs 2 at a time, and when the screaming finally stopped, I breathed a sigh of relief. When she came downstairs, she asked me to come to his office. "I need to talk to you about something, and I think this should be a family decision." I came back up to see that Dad was still staring into the screen of his MacBook, tapping away like we weren't even there. "I don't know how to explain this, but I think your father has died." Looking at his fingers as they went about their tireless typing, I asked her if she was kidding. Dad was clearly alive. His hands were moving, and I could see words on the screen forming coherent sentences. Were they playing a joke or something? None of what she was saying made any sense. "I checked his pulse. He has no pulse, no vitals. He's just gone, sweetie. But it appears that he's not quite gone." She tried to move him, and as she turned him away, I could see his lifeless face as it turned to regard me. His jaw had been hanging slack, his eyes open and staring, and his hands came away from the keyboard. He started screaming all over again. It was a deep and tortured noise, similar to the one he'd made before. And without even meaning to, I turned him back to the keyboard, where his hand started typing again. I asked her what was going on, and Mom shrugged as she tried to come up with a reason for all this. His book was important to him, you know that. I think maybe once he finishes it, he might stop on his own. I can't explain what's happening here, but I don't want him to die with his work unfinished. Your father kept saying it wasn't ready, but I'm going to send the first manuscript to his editor. Maybe once he sees it and someone puts it in print, he'll finally be able to rest. But either way, let's keep this between us, okay? I want your father to pass on without regrets, don't you? I nodded, telling her that, of course, I wanted Dad to die at peace. Then, do him this last favor, and don't tell anyone what you've seen here. Promise? I didn't know how to feel about this, but I told her I wouldn't tell anyone, and she thanked me as she hugged me goodbye. I left in my U-Haul, unsure how to feel about the situation, but I kept the secret. I didn't come home much for the next year. I came home for Thanksgiving as promised, but the whole thing felt uncomfortable. Mom and I sat downstairs eating, her curious about how school was going and me filling her in on my studies. As I ate turkey and tried to have a normal conversation over stuffing, all I could focus on was the tapping from upstairs. Mom had closed the door to Dad's office, something that I could never remember happening at any time in my life. But despite her best efforts, the tapping was still audible. There was also a smell from the room at the end of the hall, and I was worried about her living in a house with a decomposing body. She said he hadn't decomposed much, but I think she might have been trying to spare my feelings. Worse than the smell, though, was the tapping. It never stopped and sounded too loud to be from whole fingers. Despite this, Mom was in pretty good spirits. She said Dad's first book was being edited, and his publicist thought it would be likely ready for the shelves next year. He couldn't believe my dad had been keeping this gem to himself for so long. And I think that was when I realized how few people Dad had shared his books with. She said the initial payment on the book had allowed her to pay some overdue bills, and she would send him the second book sometime next year. If I release them slowly, it won't seem so odd when he finishes, and I let them know he's passed. I asked if his writing had slowed at all, and she said he was still typing night and day. He never rests, and I've had to start sleeping in my noise-canceling headphones. The sound takes some getting used to, but I think I can almost put it out of my mind. I had meant to stay for the week, but I ended up making excuses and leaving the day after Thanksgiving. The sound of the keys as they clicked away was becoming too much for me to handle. After that, I made excuses to not come home. I told Mom I had a paper due during Christmas and stayed on campus over the holiday. I took extra classes, so I didn't have to come home on semesters I would have been able to take a break from. I still called her on the phone, but our conversations became shorter and shorter as time went on. The longer I was on the line with her, the more pervasive the clicking became, and it felt like I could hear it over the phone, no matter where she was. My mother's mental state began to deteriorate as well. She had sent the second book to the publicist, and he had fast-tracked it after the first one had done so well. She deflected any sort of interviews or phone calls for Dad, telling them how shy and anxious he was. But people really seemed to want to pick his brain about the direction of the book, and they were becoming harder and harder to put off. She didn't sound like her usual self either. It was clear that she wasn't sleeping, and she said the clicking was getting louder and louder the longer it went on. I tried to do some soundproofing in his office, but it never seems to help. I can't stand to be in there for very long, even though he's looking at the screen. I could feel him watching me when I'm in there, I think. Mom took a breath, and I could almost see her looking in the direction of his office as she pitched her voice low. I think I can hear something moving around at night. I asked what she meant, afraid that maybe animals had gotten in to try and get at Dad's body, but she said it was just little sounds. You remember how he used to leave his office late at night to get food? Sometimes I feel like I can hear someone coming down the stairs in the wee hours of the morning. While I was listening to it the other night, I realized that I couldn't hear the keyboard anymore, and that scared me even more. She started crying then, and I think I had already decided to come home that weekend so we could sort this out. I hadn't come home in a long time and found a very different woman than I had over Thanksgiving the year before. And why not? It had to be nerve-wracking knowing you were sharing a house with a corpse. Mom looked like she had aged 20 years. Her hair, light blonde the last time I'd been home, was threaded with gray and looked thinner than ever. Her skin sagged and her eyes looked bruised from the bags under them. She was thin to the point of emaciation, and I wondered if she had been eating. When she hugged me, I could feel her ribs pressing against me, and I decided then that something had to be done before I lost both my parents. I told her that we had to end this. I told her that we had to put him to rest, but she feebly resisted. He isn't done yet. He's still typing up there. I can't lay him to rest until he finishes. I asked her how long that would be, but she didn't seem to have the answer. I told her I was tired and wanted to rest, but after I heard her door close and the sound of her springs grumbling as she went to bed, I got up and went downstairs. I wanted to see what this thing was that was moving around after dark, and I knew just the place to hide. There was a small closet in the living room, a place for wrapping paper and old crafts Mom hadn't gotten around to yet, and after sliding some things around, I made myself comfortable and cracked the door. It took some time, and I wished I had some coffee to keep me from dozing in the small warm space. I was just starting to nod off, my phone showing 3:30 in the morning, when the landing at the top of the stairs creaked. Something glided down almost soundlessly, its body light, and I pressed my eye to the slit in the door to see what it was. It was dark in the living room, the curtains drawn, but I didn't dare turn on a light. If it knew I was here, it might flee, and then I'd have nothing to report to Mom in the morning. Luckily for me, it jolted right by the closet door, and the creature was impossible to miss. It was thin, almost lacking dimension, creaking as it ambled into the kitchen. I held my breath as it disappeared into the dim space, but the pale head was hard to miss. When it turned to look at the closet from the kitchen doorway, I feared I had made a noise. When those empty sockets fixed on the door, I covered my mouth with my hand. When the creature creaked its way into the kitchen and disappeared from sight, I tripped out of the closet and made my way less than gracefully back up the stairs and into my old room. If it heard me, it didn't stop at the door to comment. Only then did I come to the same conclusion that Mom had, realizing what was missing from the silent house. The tapping had stopped. We called the police the next day, me threatening to call them myself if Mom didn't. I didn't know what the thing I'd seen was doing in the kitchen, but I couldn't very well leave her alone with it. She just nodded and picked up the phone, and I think she was ready to call them. She had lived with Dad's corpse for 2 years, and even she had agreed that it was time to end it. The paramedics weren't sure what to make of him, but he was definitely what I had seen the night before as it went into the kitchen. He had mostly rotted, but his bones had moldering flesh still attached in places. His scalp had some hairs clinging to it. The bald spot I had noticed was still visible, but we had taken his hands off the keyboard before they got there. When we had taken him from the computer, his scream was little more than a wheeze of protest. He had no vocal cords to scream with, but still, he protested. The police had questions, but I think my mother managed to convince them that it was harmless. She said that when he died, she had gone a little crazy. She couldn't cope with him being gone, so she had just pretended he was in the office, typing away on his novel. I told them that was what she had told me for months, and I think they believed me. Dad's remains were taken to the funeral home, and it goes without saying that his funeral was a closed casket affair. As we sat on the front row, though, I heard something that would haunt me until I went into the ground myself. Dad may not have been able to scream, but it seemed his work went on regardless. As I sat there with Mom, my mother sobbing as she heard the all too familiar sound, we both heard the low tapping as those bony fingers smacked against the lid of the coffin. I can only assume that they still press against the lid even now. My father's last story, worn into the wood of his coffin. And that, dear listeners, is the end of these long-form, scary stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you are awake and listening, I hope you have enjoyed this collection. Until the next time, I'll read to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good